So I want to do a quick video just because Biden spoke at Morehouse this past weekend, and kind of what he said went largely underreported just because it wasn't sexy enough. He didn't say anything crazy, right? Which is a general problem I have with the media anyway. But I did want to talk about what happened right before the speech that I think is really important because it knocks down a narrative that I'm seeing more and more as the election is coming up, which is that the Biden-Harris administration has done nothing for Black people. It's very specifically nothing for Black people, right? So there was a report that came out. It's now finally being picked up by sort of the bigger outlets, which I'm happy to see. But there was a report about the amount of funding the Biden-Harris administration has done for HBCUs over the last 3 years. That number was $16 billion, billion with a B, of funding for HBCUs. Specifically, not HBCUs and other, predominantly white institutions. No, just historically Black colleges and universities. So the USA Today actually had a nice breakdown. So I just wanted to go over that for people who don't know. Of that $16 billion over the last 3 years, by the way, that's unmatched by anybody else who's been president, period. Okay, Democrat or Republican. Nearly $4 billion of that $16 billion was investing in HBCUs through the American Rescue Plan, and other COVID relief legislation. $2.6 billion invested from the Department of Ed to build institutional capacity at HBCUs. $1.6 billion invested through federal grants, cooperative agreements, and other, quote, competitive funding opportunities. $950 million to support HBCUs in growing research capacity and related infrastructure. $719 million in grant funding to expand STEM academic capacity and educational programs. $150 million in federal contracting opportunities awarded to HBCUs, including for research and expansion of STEM education programs at the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy, and U.S. agencies for international development. $1.6 billion in capital finance debt relief for 45 public and private HBCUs, over $2.4 million in Project Serve funds to support HBCUs affected by more than a dozen bomb threats in 2022. That's kind of interesting. $2.8 billion in need-based grants and other federal programs, including Pell Grants, federal work study, and supplemental educational opportunity grants, and nearly $1.3 billion to support veterans attending HBCUs through the GI Bill and other college graduate and training programs. So look, when people say that there is nothing that the Biden administration has done for Black people specifically, right? It's a weird context that people like to put on that. But when they say that, understand that is devoid of facts. And this is just one thing. I just because I just thought it was such an interesting bit of information that was put out there. And again, this is over the last 3 years. It's not like, oh shit, I'm speaking at Morehouse, let me put together something and do it next week. No, this is what they have been doing for a number of years, right? And look, if this is not a big deal to you, let the following facts be a huge deal to you. 40% of Black engineers, half of all Black teachers, 70% of all Black doctors and dentists earn their degrees at HBCUs, right? That's a little bit of a big deal. According to social mobility research by the United Negro College Fund, HBCUs support almost 5 times more students than Ivy League schools in helping community members transition from the bottom 40% to the top 60%. So look, it is important to understand that politics is complicated and that you're not always going to get what you want. And sometimes people get stuff that you don't agree with and all this other stuff. But to say that they've done nothing for Black people is devoid of facts. And I think it's important to look at that stuff. You can vote for them or not, but it is important to understand these things. And what drives me crazy is that things like this go largely underreported. And look, that's also the Biden administration's fault too, because they need a ministry of, yo, we did this shit, right? But absent of that, it is also the media's fault that they don't tell people about this stuff. Now, people got to live their lives. They don't have time to be a giant dork like me and go read up on this stuff all the time. But it is important for us to be aware when these facts come out, for people like me who know, to tell people and try to help people understand that when people make bullshit arguments about nothing is being done to help Black people, that is simply not true.